Hey guys, so we are moving our mixing conversations from TikTok over to the YouTube channel, so we got a little bit more time to expand on some of these topics. I'm going to do a TikTok live at some point where we will just have a general discussion. I'll break out the M32 live in the shop and get the camera set up, and we'll actually go through channel by channel, my sort of kind of approach to how I mix and, how I do what I do. But for now, let's continue our conversation. If you haven't been following the TikTok channel, I would suggest you go over there. We've been posting videos almost every day about mix tips on compression and EQing and system tech kind of stuff and all that sort of thing. Today, we're going to talk about gain structure. So, and there's so much to cover on the subject. Which is the biggest reason why I wanted to do it over here on YouTube, just so we didn't have the time restraints and we can cover it the way we want to. So gain structure is basically talking about the relationship between the input gain, the output gain of each channel in relation to the gain of your subgroups in relationship to the gain of your final left, right, out. Without getting too crazy technical, because if you need to go that technical, then maybe you should just go to school somewhere and get into that. Or buy the Yamaha Sound Reinforcement Handbook, which is the sound reinforcement Bible, for this sort of stuff. But I used to be a guy who would set all my channel faders at 0 unity, and then, have my left, right, out somewhere around -15, sometimes even -20, depending on the system. And then, kind of hit the channels kind of hard. In analog world, that was perfect. In analog world, that worked out really well because you had analog preamps, mic pre's in each channel, and you got what we called preamp saturation that way. And man, it was super cool and made everything sound warm and fat, and it was super groovy. In the digital realm, you lose all that, at least in these middle market consoles, let me put it that way. You lose all that natural fatness that comes with analog mic pre's. If you get up into the Pro Touring consoles, they fix that issue. Most of them are using analog mic pre's at some point in the signal chain and just converting it, over to digital. I know that the Midas Heritage is super famous for that. And man, they sound like analog consoles with all the buzzers and whistles of digital. It's a beautiful thing. But with all this middle market stuff, like say the Soundcraft SI, UI, all the Allen and Heath stuff, the SQ, the QU, the X and M32, the TF Yamaha stuff, even maybe the CL Yamaha. The QL, I think, might have a little better preamps in it. I think that's the higher of the two, but nevertheless, I said all that to say this: you got to have like really good ears for EQ and be able to create that warmth and that depth of your mix. And gain structure is a huge part of that, because if your gain structure is off on your channels, your EQ responds differently. That was super, important in analog days. And digital days, it's not quite as crucial, but it still plays a role. Not to mention the input gain on each channel, that knob at the top of your channel, or when you're in the channel overview, it will say gain. That's the input gain. It directly affects your monitor sends. So if you turn up the gain on the kick, well, then that kick is also going to go up in every monitor mix that has the kick in it. So you have to kind of work your way through all that and keep all that stuff in mind. It's really a balancing act, and pun intended, it really is a balancing act in trying to get all that stuff, working in a way to where, it's giving you a maximum amount of, clarity and, fidelity in your mix. Nowadays, like I said before, I used to mix with the fader at 0 and front of house at like -10 or 20 or whatever. Now I try to mix negative or the channels at -10, and usually the main outs or the left right outs front of house at as close to unity as I can get. In fact, I usually start out at unity, and if it's too loud, I'll just pull it down there. My aux sub almost always sets at unity, because we have an aux that gives us independent control over that in the channels. But doing it this way in digital world, you never want to see red lights in digital world. If you hit an overload light every now and then, it's not the end of the world, because what you have to understand is those overload lights usually come on somewhere between 6 and 10 dBu before distortion. So if you get a little blinky red light every now and then, I always say if the red light's staying on longer than 3 seconds, then you need to cut the gain. Really, if it's staying on longer, maybe 2 seconds, I would probably cut the gain. But if it's just hitting the red light every now and then as a peak, it's not the end of the world. You're not overdriving your brains out because you haven't reached the level of distortion yet. Believe me, your ears will let you know when you hit the distortion level. So you just adjust accordingly. So I try to, like I said, front of house at like unity, the channel's at about -10, and then I'll dial in the gain to where I'm into the mid part of the yellow on my channel fader meter, and then just kind of adjust. The cool thing about that is when the band really gets hammering and stage volume starts getting cranked up, you got a ton of overhead, specifically in the vocal channels. You got a ton of overhead to really get the vocals up where you need them. Because by the middle of the first set, after the guitar players have turned up after sound check and all this other stuff and everything else, and the drums get going and everybody kind of gets settled into just how loud they're going to be on stage, then, I might find my vocals, even with that hot gain setting, up close to 0 or at 0 unity in those channels, depending on the system. Again, let your ears tell you what to do. Now there's a relationship between the channels and the subgroups. The subgroups are groups where you can apply compression and extra EQing. I usually never use anything but compression in my subgroups unless I'm correcting for something. I have occasionally been in really challenging rooms where I've had to go to the vocal subgroup and dip out a 2.5 or a 400, or something just across all the vocals. I usually try to find all that stuff in the channels instead of hacking up the front of house EQ or the subgroup EQ or something like that. But it's there if you need it. To where DCAs have no effect really on your levels outside the fact that they're just a remote control for the channel levels. So if you have 8 channels of drums in your drums DCA, the only thing that fader gives you the ability to do is to turn that group of channels up and down. It's just like a remote control, digital control amplifier is what DCA stands for. So, kind of keep all that in mind. I usually run my subgroups at unity. If I need to do some stuff with the gain in the subgroup, most of the time, because I'm really relying heavily on compression in the subgroup, specifically with vocals. The only thing I have in subgroups is vocals, and I will occasionally do a subgroup with horns. I will adjust the output gain on the compressor to kind of give me a little extra oomph if I need it there. Makeup gain, that sort of thing, depending on how hard I'm compressing at the subgroup. I'm usually doing most of my compression at the channel, and you can refer back to my TikTok video about compression that will, give you all the ins and outs on that. So that is basic gain structure, parameters on the console. Now let's bring into the conversation the things that are happening on stage. Because, we have, like, the bane of my existence are these guitar players and keyboard players. Guitar players specifically, they'll have a volume pedal. Kind of looks like a wah, but it's a volume pedal. And they'll do sound check with that volume pedal at about halfway up. Then as soon as we get going, they floor that volume pedal, And, now that completely changes the game structure of everything. Keyboard players will go, halfway up. I'm back here, beating my channels to death trying to get gain out of them. And they're trying to save a little bit of headroom for when they have keyboard solos and stuff like that. Like, I'm okay if you want to save that last 25% for that. I'm okay. I have no problem with that. I have no problem with guitar players that want to use a lead patch that boosts them 4 to 6 dB. That's great. As long as it's not double the volume like is usually the case, I have no issues with any of that stuff. So, I mean, you guys are welcome to, keep that stuff at your disposal, as you're performing. But what you don't understand is when you turn up on stage, it completely changes the gain structure for the monitors. Even if you have a separate monitor console, and in this conversation, we are talking from the perspective of running monitors from front of house, because that's what we do most of the time here in the middle market. So when you turn up your guitar or you floor that volume pedal, then now your guitar just came up in everybody's monitor as well. And then if I have to turn it down at front of house, then it never fails, man. You're going to be in some song playing a rhythm part that's lost now. Because one of the biggest complaints I have with guitar players is you don't go through all your different patches and get them the same level. All your rhythm patches should be the same volume. If they're not, then it's just an absolute nightmare for the sound guy because he's chasing your levels around all night. Keyboard players are just as guilty, 100% as guilty, with this. As, a horn sound is naturally louder than like a digital piano sound because a horn sound has a lot of mid-range frequencies in it, and a digital piano is much warmer, and has a lot of body. So it's not about like I've had keyboard players say, well, I have them all turned up on 10. They're all the same volume. No, dude, you're missing the point here. Each of those different sounds have a different frequency response, and some will naturally sound louder than others. So I always recommend that you download an SPL dB meter app on your phone, set it in front of your rig and go through all your patches and get them all as close to the same volume as you can. And with keyboard players, that means you'll have to plug it into like a little powered, speaker or something or whatever, and, make that happen. At least get them in the ballpark. Because the worst thing you want your sound guy doing is chasing guitar and keyboard levels around all night when he really should be focused on mixing vocals and flying effects in and out. I'm totally okay with boosting guitar solos and all that kind of stuff. It's nice when you have your lead patch set in a way to where I don't have to chase it that way, but I'm 100% okay with having to chase it for solos. Because typically when guitar solos are happening, vocals are not happening. That's a guitar solo section, not a vocal section. So it's not the end of the world. So there's a relationship in gain between what you're being given on stage and what you're dealing with at the desk itself, at the console itself. The other thing is wireless microphones. Most people don't understand that there's typically a gain in the handheld mic that you hold in your hand. There's a gain on that device, and there's a gain on the receiver. You got to get those gains in relationship with each other to where, like, if you have the mic gain way too hot and your receiver gain way low, then you're going to be distorting the microphone itself into your receiver, and then I'm getting a distorted signal, but you're looking at me like, well, man, I'm not clipping or anything at the receiver. I don't understand why it's distorted. Well, it's because you got your mic gain too hot. I always try to set all that stuff at 0 and start there, and get the relationship between your mic gain and your receiver gain correct before it gets to me. Once it gets to me, look, man, poop in, poop out. That's the way this stuff works, If you are going to, give me trash, I cannot turn trash into a 3-course, dinner. Trash is always going to look and smell like and sound like trash, So try to get that stuff figured out at home, not at the gig. I just had a guy, comment on one of my videos yesterday, and said that the thing drives him crazy as a singer shows up right from Guitar Center with his brand new wireless mic, and he's trying to figure all that stuff out at the gig. And when he can't figure it out in 10 minutes, then he turns to the sound guy and wants the sound guy to figure it out. And, here's a news flash. We don't sit around studying every, wireless mic system in the world so that we have all their little workflow things, fluid in our work, our workflow. I mean, it's nuts, man. You do that stuff at home, watch the tuners on YouTube and do the things you need to do. If it's a system I'm familiar with, yeah, man, sure, I'll give you a hand. But you know what? I'm trying to set the rest of the stage up and get ready for sound check. I don't have time to fix your gear. That's your responsibility, not mine. So do that stuff at home, man. Hook that thing up to a little PA system at home or a powered speaker or something and make sure it's not distorting. If it's distorting, turn the gain on your handheld down some. Look at the gain on your receiver. Where is it at? If you're blasting the gain out on all that stuff, well, then you might be having problems there. That's the kind of stuff you got to figure out at home. As sound guys, these are all the nightmare things that we deal with regularly. Trying to make sense out of your gear. And let me give you, I'll end with this because I'm going to wrap this up. This conversation can go on for hours, and I could tell you stories for hours, nightmare stories. But the bands that come to the gig prepared, have all their patches leveled out, keyboards and guitar players have their patches leveled out, have their little solo boosts in check where they need to be, that have, their wireless mics set up correctly, and don't have to fiddle around with all that stuff before sound check or during sound check. Those are the bands that are always going to sound like $1 million out front, because then the house sound guy doesn't have to, correct a bunch of your crap because you're too lazy to put in the work at home to get this stuff working correctly. You want to be a really good band, get that stuff going. All we do as sound engineers is put the icing on the cake. You've got to bring correctly baked cake to the table. You know what I'm saying? Like, your gear should sound professional at home. It should, and a lot of times, and I recommend this all the time, a lot of times you need to just record yourself at home and listen to it back, so you can get an outside perspective as to what your guitar tone is or what your keys sound like or, how your vocal sounds. Sometimes you need to bring other musicians that you respect into the conversation in your rehearsal space and let them listen to your tone and let them listen to your stuff. Or ask your sound guy at the gig, like, hey, man, what did you think of my tone tonight? And don't get pissed off when he tells you he hated it, because you want to know the truth. We're trying to help you. We don't tell you negative things to hurt you. It's constructive criticism, not destructive criticism. Anytime I come to you, and it's like the older I get in this business, the less I even care, because I'm just like, some of you guys got egos and I just don't have time for it, man. If you want to sound like crap, sound like crap. And I mix some bands that sound like dog snot, and it's like their fans are so used to them sounding that way. What motivation do I have to try and fix it? Especially if you just went and spent, a couple grand on a Kemper and then, tinkered with it until it sounded like dog snot, trash. Then you show up at the gig and you're like, man, my Kemper just, I really expected more out of this amp and blah, 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 and this, that, and the other. I'm like, well, dude, you're probably the problem. The Line 6 Helix guys are horrible for this. For whatever reason, I don't know why it's the Helix guys. But I can count on one hand the guys that are playing Helixes that actually got good guitar tone. The rest of them, man, sound thin and just like trash, man. It's just not good, If that's what you're bringing to the stage, it's not my responsibility to fix your gear. You fix it. I'm going to put a mic in front of it, or I'm going to run a line to it. I'm going to turn it up, and I'm going to try to fatten it up a little bit on my end, but I can't recreate the wheel. This is sound reinforcement. We're reinforcing what you give us. This isn't sound creation. We're not creating your tone. You got to do that. Gain structure is a huge part of all that. So I hope this helps you guys. I hope this made some sense. I know I kind of talk in circles a little bit, but and excuse the frustration, but I am the grumpy sound guy, so you kind of get what you get. I'll see you next time. Take care.